Okay, so we are now recording. The session is now being recorded. Okay, so as I was saying, a warm welcome to this panel on haze and social injustice in Southeast Asia. This is a public session organized for the International Conference on New Research in International Development, Human Rights, International Relations at Time of Disruption. My name is Carl Middleton. I'm from the Center for Social Development Studies in the Faculty of Political Science at Chulalongkorn University. We are the convener of the panel today. We have convened this panel on the basis that over the past couple of decades, air pollution has become a major issue of public concern across Southeast Asia, and it's risen to the highest levels of public policy and politics, locally, nationally, and transnationally. But we also recognize that in terms of the production of air pollution and the politics of blame towards it, as well as the impacts of air pollution on health, or haze impact on health and livelihoods in both urban and rural areas, often the social justice dimension is less emphasized. It's kind of, oftentimes it's assumed that everybody experiences haze in the same way. But in practice, whether we're talking about the production of haze or even more, less discussed, who's exposed and who's harmed due to haze, this is something that we'd like to focus on a bit more in this seminar today. So the topics that we'd like to address for this panel, the sort of question of how do various economic, social, and political inequalities intersect in relation to air pollution in terms of its creation and its exposure, as well as the consequences for individuals, for families, and society as a whole. And then a second question that we also hope the panel will address relates to how have past experiences of air pollution and the heated debates that they've generated influenced the possibilities of the present and looking towards future solutions. And all of this is taking place in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic that has disrupted many economic activities, as well as political processes. So we're also interested in this panel to explore what does the COVID-19 pandemic mean for haze in the present and for the future. So we have four very well qualified speakers that I will briefly introduce now. And this will also be the order of the presentation. So we will begin with Dr. Helena Varkey, who is in the Department of Strategic and International Studies at the University of Malaya in Malaysia. Then we will have a presentation by Daniel Hayward, who is from the Regional Center for Social Science and Sustainable Development at Chiang Mai University, Thailand. Daniel has kindly agreed to step in for Professor Chayan Vanaputi, who unfortunately an urgent issue came up that he has to attend to. Then we will have a presentation by Tara Buakamashri from Greenpeace Southeast Asia in Thailand. And then the final presentation will be by Benjamin Tay from PM Haze in Singapore. So for the structure of the panel, we will begin just with the presentations. Each speaker will have 15 minutes each. And then we will open up the panel for discussion with questions from the floor, or the virtual floor at least. So with that, can I hand over to Helena for the first presentation? Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Carl, for the introduction and also for the invitation for me to be part of this, this very esteemed panel. So, as Carl has mentioned, I'm from the University of Malaya, and I've been looking at the haze issue for about 15 years now, but mostly from the southern Southeast Asia perspective. So please excuse me if some of the things that I talk about today is more southern centric, but I do look forward to the next presentation, which I understand will bring in the more northern Mekong region view of this, which will hopefully balance it out. So I will talk to you hopefully not much more than 15 minutes. about basically contextualizing haze within the COVID-19 scenario that we are facing now as sort of introduction. So just a bit on air quality and public health. So some of the interesting things that has come out of the recent discoveries with relation to COVID-19 and also with relation to air quality and sickness in general is that there's been quite a lot of linkages between the number of deaths linked to COVID-19 and even to SARS in the past in relation to areas that have high pollution, high air pollution. So for example, research about SARS in China showed that areas in China with really high pollution, high air pollution, there was twice the number of death rates. And for the COVID-19 context that we see now, obviously we all know that COVID-19 is a respiratory disease. And because this respiratory disease causes much of the deaths related to COVID-19, there has been a lot of linkages that scientists have put together on the early sort of data that they collected. For example, in Italy, a lot more of the northern regions, which are much more polluted in terms of air, they saw higher death rates, 12% higher compared to the less polluted areas in the country. In the US, similar things were found. An increase in PM2.5 concentrations of just 1 microgram per cubic meter was associated with 15% increase in COVID-19 deaths. And even more interestingly, it's not just about how the pollution is right now, it also takes into account prolonged exposure over time. So what that means is they found in the US areas that had prolonged air pollution in one area, those areas also had substantially higher mortality rate. So in that context, when we think about what we have here in Southeast Asia, a lot of the cities that we are in actually do suffer from prolonged air pollution. So for example, in 2019, all ASEAN countries other than Brunei was in the top 60 list of countries with the worst air pollution. Our air pollution in Southeast Asia is already high because of a baseline of pollution caused by a mix of urban and industrial emissions. And then that top it off with our seasonal haze that everybody is here to talk about basically. And this haze, of course, is related to forest fires and agricultural activities. Because of this, we in Southeast Asia, we are exposed to these long-term health consequences from bad air pollution. PM2.5 particles have the long-term effect of weakening our cardiovascular and immunity systems. For example, a recent study in 2016 from Harvard estimated that more than 100,000 additional deaths happened in this region during the 2015 haze season, which is linked because of the haze. So basically in the context of COVID-19, someone with already weakened lungs, which is probably all of us living in this region, and weakened respiratory tract has a higher risk of not just getting infected by COVID, but also suffering worse symptoms. So we have not in this part of the world been suffering from the huge numbers of deaths and of sicknesses like parts of the West. But this is the risk that we face due to our long-term exposure to air pollution in the region. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but this is the position that we are in, being exposed to this air pollution over time. So anyway, how did the region respond to COVID-19? As we know, we have been experiencing lockdowns, closures, and all this. And you know, in the beginning, everybody was talking about how because everybody had to stay at home because of all the lockdowns, there was improvements in environmental conditions, improvement in air conditions all around the region. So we observed this in Malaysia, we observed this in Indonesia. I'm not so sure about Thailand, but I'm sure it was similar as well. And this was something that we were very happy about. Everybody was enjoying the clean air, the blue skies and all this. But today, as we face it now, we are kind of coming out of this COVID-19. We are loosening up, we're restarting the economy and all that. Conditions are most probably going to return to normal very quickly. For example, in China, a few months back when they started opening up, people started traveling again, industries were restarting, air pollution levels were bounced back really quickly. There was a reduction during the COVID-19 season in China. There was a reduction of 10% numbers of unhealthy air days, but it's most likely not going to happen again anytime soon once everything goes back to normal. So in the context of COVID-19, what is the haze threat for us this year? In terms of the likelihood of us experiencing haze, just in terms of the weather, there's a moderate risk of severe transboundary haze, not high. We had a bad year last year, but the dry season is expected to be milder this year. The El Nino season and also the Indian Ocean dipole is projected to be neutral in this year as well. And there's also some forecasts of slightly above normal rainfall for Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. Again, I apologize for not being so sure about Thailand. So in terms of the weather seems to be quite comfortable in the sense that we may not have the conditions that's going to have a very severe haze. However, we have seen, despite the lockdowns, despite everything, forest fires have been happening this year. So there was fire issues in Thailand, there was fire issues in Indonesia since April, and there have also been incidences somewhat linked to the lockdown, where a lot of projects, or basically one very controversial project was going forward, was being pushed through despite being so controversial, kind of shrouded in the limitations, the movement limitations of COVID-19. So these were kind of the on-the-ground effects of COVID-19. And this is something that I took from the SIIA Haze Outlook 2020. SIIA is a think tank based in Singapore who collects data about haze, among other things that they do, and they talk to people like us who are working on haze, and they collect all these views, and they came up with a very interesting analysis on how COVID-19 is impacting haze risk in Southeast Asia. So again, this is a bit more contextualized to the south, but in terms of how COVID-19 is impacting us, mainly in terms of resources, we can see very clearly. So for example, in terms of expenditure, COVID-19 has tapped into disaster relief funding. So if there is going to be a haze, these funds may not be available to be used for haze crisis because it's already been spent elsewhere. In terms of other health resources, COVID-19 has stressed healthcare systems, especially in terms of personal protective equipment. So if there is going to be a major haze incident, there would definitely be a strain on healthcare and also on masks, which is something that is of short supply right now in this context. Restoration efforts for fire-prone areas, the agencies that are in charge of this have been impacted in terms of their movement, in terms of their budget. Enforcement, less capacity of enforcement agencies to patrol and to prevent illegal forest fires because they are focused on COVID-related prevention and enforcement, for example, social distancing and things like this. Engagement, in-person community engagement by governments, by NGOs and companies related to fire and related to fire risk definitely has been pulled back because meetings and large gatherings are no longer possible in person, and whatever it is, even though we are having an online seminar right now, it is not that effective if we have online compared to face-to-face. We want to talk about the importance of fire control and importance of prevention. So these are all of the ways that the COVID-19 attention may affect how the region can respond to haze, whether they can do it effectively or not. And clearly this will be a big question mark. In terms of economic implications of COVID-19, smallholders, okay, if you look in the context of Southeast Asia, we usually talk about smallholders either in palm oil, and we talk about the big players in palm oil and pulp and paper. So smallholders, usually what they do is they request assistance from the government or from bigger players to clear land without using fire. So under these conditions, they may not be able to do that. So there might be a problem there of them to avoid using fire. Corporate plantations, COVID-19 has happened in a time where markets were already bad. For example, for palm oil, the EU phase out of palm oil led to a depression of commodity prices as well as export volumes. So it's already sort of a depressed market. So this is even adding on to the pressure, the economic pressure. Large players may be able to continue business as usual because they have the funds to sustain through this sort of crisis. However, small and medium growers may have different considerations. So small and medium growers, if they are cash strapped, they may slow down expansion, which may be good in terms of trying to maintain the fire situation. However, small and medium growers who do have a bit of cash, they may even be encouraged to resort to even more opening up of land because they want to make as much as possible during this time. And slash and burn or fire practices are the cheapest method to do so. So this may be a fire encouraging more fire use during this crisis time. Small and medium growers fall within the gray areas of sustainability because they are less visible compared to the big players, and they're not part of a lot of sustainability systems like the RSPO. And therefore, this is the gray area that we are mostly worried about, whether these small and medium growers will continue to observe or will observe sustainability and fire control issues. Just a minute or two on social justice implications. Haze is already a serious social justice issue all around the region. Poor people are less able to protect themselves from haze. N95 masks are more expensive than normal masks. Medical care is limited unless you have the funds to go private. A lot of poorer people are not able to stay at home from work. A lot of poor people have to work outdoors, and a lot of the poorer people as well, they don't have safe accommodation that is airtight compared to people who live in air-conditioned apartments, for example. And also areas most affected by haze are usually far away from administrative centers. For example, Sumatra and Kalimantan in Indonesia and northern Thailand in Thailand. So obviously the attention is a bit distant because of this. So this is the ways where haze is very briefly a serious social justice issue. But when we bring in COVID-19 to the mix, it becomes an even more terrible cauldron of social justice issues as well. We all have heard of how COVID-19 responses has highlighted issues of social justice. For example, issues with social distancing, whether disadvantaged groups are able to practice social distancing, whether they're able to work from home, the undocumented people, are they able to get access to tests, are they able to get access to healthcare? And definitely the COVID-19 has impacted the poorer, more rural folks much more severely. So in conclusion, we don't know how long COVID-19 will last in this region yet. We are still kind of loosening up, but we're still kind of in the midst of it. So it's too early to determine the full implications of COVID-19 on fires and haze. But the longer it persists, because of the big link to health and to other sorts of resources, consequences will definitely be more severe. Should a major haze incident occur in the midst of COVID-19, it will be an added public health burden. It will be poor air quality is going to make everything worse, especially in terms of people already suffering from respiratory ailments. And rural livelihoods are even going to be affected much more, and they may even result to a more fire risk behavior, resulting in a vicious cycle that continues to burn on and produce more and more haze. So governments and other stakeholders should take a stronger social justice approach in response to both haze and COVID-19 to mitigate this risk. There has been research that interventions, whether public or private, is more effective in times of change. So I think this is a very opportunistic moment where we can grasp this time of change and of crisis to make interventions that are more positive and more beneficial for social justice. So I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Helena. That was a very comprehensive presentation. And I think really sets up the panel well because it's given us an overview of the region and the key issues, both the underlying ones as well as in the context of the current pandemic. So now we will move to slightly more specific cases. And we'll start in northern Thailand and work our way southwards. So we'll begin with Daniel in Chiang Mai University, who will talk on maize and haze in northern Thailand and Myanmar as well, I think. Daniel.
Thank you very much, Carl. I'll just set up the screen here. Okay. I presume everyone can see this now.
Including the notes.
So,
it's not the full screen.
Sorry, what's that?
It's not the full screen. It's the PowerPoint. It includes the note box.
So you don't see the present.
Oh, I think you have to click the enable editing button at the top, maybe.
Ah.
Wait. Just having a look. Enable it.
Yeah. And then now I think you can go to full screen.
And now on
Okay.
here to full screen.
We see the next slide.
Yeah, because I can go to this.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I will. Apologies for the delay there. So, my name is Daniel Hayward, and I'm the project coordinator of the Mekong Land Research Forum at RCSD in Chiang Mai University. Ajahn Chayan sends his apologies that he could not present today, but hopefully this will kind of prove a suitable replacement. I think it's very nice to bring this particular presentation after what we've just heard from Dr. Helena, because as Carl suggested, it starts to now look at the issues from a slightly different angle, from a more specified case, and moving from a case into the haze issue. And the case I want to address here is that of maize production and its impact upon haze, specifically in northern Thailand. And so with this short presentation, looking at the dynamics of the production system, I then want to relate this to how land is used in Thailand, how it connects with haze and other associated issues, and then to start thinking in terms of what does this mean in terms of social injustice. We link it to the role of farmers and the private sector in the value chain. So maize, I mean, we have to remember that maize is a flex crop, and it has a variety of uses, whether it's as directly as food, human food, or as biofuel. But in the case of Thailand, the crop is predominantly used as part of animal feed. So at the present time, I put down 95% of production of maize is used in animal feed production. And Thailand is one of the big global players in this, is the fourth largest exporter globally of poultry products coming out of this animal feed use. The animal feed is used for different meat production systems, but predominantly for broiler production in Thailand. And this demand is going up, as you can see from the graph on the right side of the screen for broiler production. Now, on the whole, I put down that multinationals are involved in the actual production process. This is generally involving farmers working their own land, often not necessarily under kind of extended contracts, but often maybe purchasing inputs from middlemen and then selling the output either back to the same person or onto other groups of middlemen. But we have to understand that at many points through the value chain, from maize into animal feed, into meat products, multinationals are heavily involved. And one of the main multinationals that is a kind of Thai-based company is CP, which is the largest global producer of animal feed. Now, it's been in the news a lot recently, maize, and there's maybe a slight misconception that there's been a sudden boom in Thailand of maize production. And we have to be slightly careful what we're talking about when we talk about a boom. I put down here a graph on land use for maize in Thailand. And actually, if we look at the area harvested as a peak use of land in around the mid-1980s. And so if we go into sort of more the last decade, actually the amount of land used for maize is less. However, we can identify a period from this graph roughly after 2008, 2014, where there was a kind of increased period of land use. And this certainly links into rising prices, rising demand in this period. Now, if we were to look more specifically at where this increase is taking place, I've put down three kind of country graphs highlighting the amount of land use for maize in each province in Thailand. And if we compare the left and the middle country pictures from 2008 to 2013, hopefully you'll notice that there is a distinctive rise in land use in the north of the country. And this, since 2013-14, has sort of stagnated or gone down. So really what we need to talk about, if we're going to talk about a boom in maize production, we have to talk about a boom in northern Thailand. So we have to be a bit more specified here. What does this mean in terms of haze? Now, there are two principal ways that the production of maize can contribute. And I want to make it clear that I'm not putting forward maize as a sole contributor of air pollution. It is one of various facets which are adding to it in northern Thailand. But the two features here that are contributing are, number one, the clearing of new land for land for new plantations. And then number two, the burning of stubble from land already being farmed. And this stubble is burnt down in order to kind of reintroduce nutrients into the soil for to clear the land and put nutrients in for a new growing season. Now, I hope I'm not going to overlap too much with the presentation from Tara that's coming up, but I have cited some work that Greenpeace did on maize, which kind of looked at a correlation between fire hotspots and maize plantations. And from December 2018 to May 2019, they identified nearly 7,000 hotspots in maize plantation areas in upper northern Thailand, and nearly 15,000 hotspots within plantations in Shan State, Myanmar. The latter point I will come back to in a moment. So there's associated issues with this that need to be addressed. Firstly, this ties in with a lot of media coverage on deforestation in northern Thailand. And I think this was most clearly put forward in this image of the bold mountains in Nan province around 2014-15. And there's really a very strong narrative which is kind of tied in with deforestation, but also haze. It's come up from a kind of a mixed stakeholder group, and that includes military, urban middle class environmentalists, Buddhist activists, royalist think tanks, who have lamented this sort of land clearances, the burning that has been going on, and continues to this day. Now, this deforestation also, the issue also links to a kind of ongoing claim by the military or aim by the government or military government to reach a 40% level of forest cover in Thailand. I think at the moment it's about 33%. And certainly when the junta took power in 2014, they put in a very active reclamation policy to take back land farmed by villagers to be included back into state forest land or state protected land. The second associated issue is to emphasize the fact that and I think this came out clearly in the first presentation also, that this is a cross-border issue. And certainly when I was looking to maize, and this came up by doing some work with Greenpeace and Oxfam, and now this is being put into a chapter for a book as part of a WANSI environment and inequality project. But in doing this work, it became very clear that a lot of the burning of land in Shan State was due to wind speeds coming straight over into Thailand. So we are talking about, if we're going to talk about solutions, we can't talk about these in nationalist terms. We have to think in terms of kind of a regional, a cross-border perspective. What has happened with a lot of these issues is that they've ended up demonizing the smallholder as somebody who is causing the burning, causing the haze. And there are many problems I would identify with that rather singular image of, you could say this goes back to Andrew Walker's image of the forest destroyer as opposed to the forest guardian. We could look at how farmers, there is a land squeeze going on, and so farmers are looking into new areas to find land in order to farm. There's corporate pushing maize to be farmed by them, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. And then even if there is a will to move away from what could be burning practices, where then there's a whole question of, well, where is the support, whether it's financial or technical support services that could aid them to use other methods than burning. Again, I will come back to these at the end in a case study scenario. So the private sector role. Now, at the time when deforestation and burning and land change really came up in around 2014-15, there were some questions being asked of big companies involved in the maize production system, such as CP. And you can see a couple of news headlines here. However, there are various means, unlike the smallholder, there are various means whereby corporations are able to kind of sidestep the problems. And I put down three principal reasons here. So first of all, there was a kind of an active scheme put forward by CP, a traceability scheme, where they would ask farmers selling their maize to fill in a form showing that their land, that their land is under a sort of a suitable titling and is not on, say, National Forest Reserve or other protected areas. So there was a sort of domestic policy response here. There was also a certain amount of sustainable projects put forward, which I put as potentially under a greenwashing campaign. On the bottom left, I talk about, there's a photo from an organic coffee project I visited in Nan province in a maize growing area. And it was, in a way, a very canny way of reinventing the narrative of land use around organic coffee, when in fact what was happening in this area is that none of the land here is owned by the villagers. It's in the national park area. But by changing the narrative, they were able to kind of take away the controversy of land use. So they could still maintain kind of control of production or receiving crops from that area. And then on the bottom right, there has been a sort of sustainable maize production project going on. And this is a project I visited in Korat, which shows actually land being turned rather than being burnt to reintroduce stubble into the land. My question here would be, is this being rolled out extensively, and say, is this supporting, say, farmers in more remote areas in the north? So, and the third area I would talk about is regional extension and expansion, where maize has certainly been increasing in Laos and Myanmar over the last 5 to 10 years. And this often is actually catering more toward the Chinese market of poultry production. So actually what we can see is a kind of a corporate expansion whereby you can kind of cover all, if there's a problem in one country, you can kind of cover all your needs and increase your kind of options of capital generation. So last couple of slides, what we do see from this is that corporate face matters, and that putting pressure on such companies does have some sort of response. There are means to improve this situation, for the example of maize, to stop burning. And this could be anything from using stubble as biofuel, crop relaying, improving land tenure rights, or providing proper improved technological support. So there are ways forward here. Now, to finish off, I would like to mention one case as a sort of cautionary tale. Mejem, a village in a district in Chiang Mai, the other side of Doi Intanon, became very famous as a sort of a center of deforestation and of burning, a center of hotspots in the north. And a project was set up, a multi-stakeholder project was set up involving local officials, academics, communities, the private sector. And this resulted in a significant drop-off in burning by 2015. And within this kind of coordinated response, it involved things like local authorities promising improved land rights for land users in the district, and communities getting involved in surveillance towards avoiding new burning. And so in one way, this shows a positive multi-stakeholder response against what could be producing haze. However, in recent times, the authorities have changed and moved to more zero tolerance policies. And perhaps with an unfortunate inevitability, the burning has returned. So I'm going to leave it on that note. I think I'm just over my time, and hand back to Carl. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Daniel. Can I mute you because I get an echo? That's it. Okay, yeah, that was a really valuable case study looking at the situation in northern Thailand. I think some similarity with Helena's first presentation in terms of the complexity of actors involved, ranging from large corporations and transnational corporations to these to smallholders. Then I think also you've emphasized the importance of narratives in this kind of social justice or injustice dimension, that the way that narratives are generated about the reasons for burning and its impacts and what needs to change is also something that we should pay attention to. So I think we'll move to the next presenter that Daniel also mentioned, that Greenpeace has been active on this issue in Thailand and regionally. So please could I invite Tara to share about your work and perspectives on this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Carl, for inviting me to this online seminar, and also all the speakers that contributing to the discussion. Actually, because of my presentation will be very focusing on more on fossil fuel industry. So there is nothing to overlap with the Daniel presentation. So I will try to look at another aspect of air pollution, especially comparing before the COVID time, and also right after that, and then some observation around the issue of the recovery package that especially Thai government has been taking on of the issue after post COVID-19. So when we look back to the past, to the pre-COVID period in term when it comes to air pollution in Southeast Asia. I think Southeast Asia as a whole, alongside with South Asia and the western part of Asia, are identified among world region that having challenging in terms of pollution, air pollution, and then here I also when it comes to haze, I will try to focus particularly on particulate matter PM2.5. So this we can see that in the year of 2019 there has been a significant increase in air quality monitoring across Southeast Asia. The number of monitoring stations, especially from a small one, not the government one, has been increased quite significantly, more than 200% in when we compare to the 2018. It meaning that the non-government sector, non-profit sector, community organization, and also academic institution working together to actually put air pollution on the national agenda. I think most country in Southeast Asia and including Thailand. But the point here is that majority of population in the region still lack to access to the air qualities monitoring information and data. The area that identified as the most severe air pollution, for example, in the northern part of Thailand or some other country in Southeast Asia, also having challenge in terms of how the local population actually access to monitoring data, especially in the near real time or the real time, so that they can use to reduce exposure to the impact from the air pollution. The study that we work together with Center for Research on Clean Air and Energy in Southeast Asia also identify some of the big cities in Southeast Asia, including Jakarta, Bangkok, among the highest costs when it comes to GDP. Compared to the GDP, the cost of comparing the damage of the air pollution to GDP actually quite significant. For example, in Bangkok, we have like almost 3%, more than 3% of GDP that caused by damage from air pollution. This is real when it comes to the time of the pandemic in the country where the most impacted community also bear the most burden of the cost. Another aspect when it comes to air pollution in Southeast Asia is that all the government in the region, even Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, for example, still pushing the large-scale energy project, especially coal-fired power plant, even during the time of pandemic. So we have been study together with other academic group, projected that even by 2030, if we want to go business as usual with the coal power plant proposed in the pipeline in the country in Southeast Asia, we will see the increase, the rising of air pollution, especially PM2.5 and also ozone in in the different time scale compared to the current time. So this one study before COVID-19. So that's the scenario might be changed, but it maybe we need to revisit some of it. Another aspect also, because of air pollution has no border, so we see the contribution of long-range transport of air pollution outside the region, especially from China, right, contributing to more concentration in different countries in Southeast Asia. When it comes to tackling air pollution, we should not be purely working alone in the country, but we have to work together among other different stakeholders in Southeast Asia and also outside the region. I just want to show you this because of quite significant capture of the nitrogen dioxide distribution and concentration, especially in Thailand. You see different time scale from 2019 to around May, before the COVID time. Because of the seasonal variation also influencing the distribution and concentration of nitrogen dioxide, but it's very clear that the big city center and also power plant and manufacturing industry, aside from open burning that Daniel already mentioned on the aspect of northern part of Thailand and Mekong region, among the culprit when it comes to air pollution, affecting livelihood of the communities. So Bangkok has seen some improvement during the COVID time compared to last year. If you can see here, nitrogen dioxide concentration has been drastically decreased from 2019. But this one actually very temporary, short-term phenomenon. We also put together sort of different information focusing on air quality index data, comparing different time scale between 2019 and 2020. This is Bangkok air quality index. From what we can see, we can see make no different or a little bit different between last year and this year, even during the lockdown of in Bangkok. Lockdown in Bangkok is not the total lockdown. We still have some economic activity, but the lockdown bring down PM2.5 concentration in a very short period of time, especially during April and May, and then go to the same trend as last year. Same as Chiang Mai. The lockdown of Chiang Mai also happening in April and May. So we can see quite a big gap, not so big. In May, the PM2.5 concentration, actually have a big gap in May between 2019 and 2020, and then go the same trend as last year. So in that sense, we look at the post-COVID-19. What would be next step when it comes to air pollution? So we see that some countries slow opening up. Thailand going to open very soon, full open very soon. And then we have to remember that it is possible to have cleaner air. But again, without the lockdown. And how we do that? So we need to focusing on the recovery package that more sustainable and just and fair, and then leave no one behind. So, for example, we try to initiate some of the program that we've been doing in the past to be able for citizen, local community to gain more information about air pollution information. Next one is because of I'm focusing on fossil fuel industry, so we need to take a look at how we reform the current energy system, the energy transition that will bring more green and just recovery to the country. We actually last week we put together the proposal to the government, the current one, or maybe the political party in the next round of the election, if it's happened, that in the next 3 years we would like to have to use the recovery package, stimulus package, putting together to recover from COVID-19, to invest on rooftop wind, solar rooftop, 1 million solar rooftop in the government hospital or in the school across Thailand in the next 3 years, with the aim of creating job and also reducing greenhouse gas and air pollution. Another one, I think this one is more challenging because of, we know transportation system in Thailand and many parts of Southeast Asia still relying on motorized vehicle, but how we actually use this opportunity after COVID-19 situation to make a green and public-friendly transport system, which is a challenge time for us to look at it. Last but not least, because of we need to stand up and strengthen together with other stakeholder, different stakeholder, to strengthen air pollution regulation. During the COVID time, we also pushing this agenda because of, I think Dr. Helena said at the beginning that where we have bad air, that people also vulnerable to affected from COVID-19 as well. So very strong regulation to control air pollution, to also to curb air pollution is needed in the COVID-19 time and after that. Okay, I am going to stop here and then open for discussion later. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Tara. I think the data that you present really gives a good, clear picture about the distribution of the harms that are being created by air pollution across the region. And then also the proposition that you're making for how to channel funds that will be used for economic recovery to work on economic transformation. These types of precedents have happened in the past, so how to really channel them effectively. And it made me think of how actually economic structures are adjustable. Like in response to the pandemic, it was possible, it was disruptive, but for many it became possible to work from home, which seemed impossible beforehand, but could transform. So I think maintaining that sort of momentum to keep on transforming for an economy that really serves society, a healthy society, better, is a good direction to move in. So we have one more presentation moving still further southwards now to Singapore. Can I invite Benjamin Tay to present on your work in Singapore? Thank you.
Hi, Carl. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to co-share this panel with our esteemed panelists. Sorry, just... Okay, yeah. So when haze comes to mind, I think we often get that feeling of powerlessness, right? It's an issue so large that no one person can actually solve it. So I think the essence of what we do is really bringing the power back to the people and helping them to actually understand that that these solutions are viable for both the individual as well as other stakeholders in the landscape to solve this perennial issue. So I think my presentation today will largely be focused as a case study of what can be done to solve the problem and to in that sense in line with today's topic, to bring the power back to the people, to bring justice for this particular issue. So PM Haze, we are a registered charity in Singapore, and our programs are actually supported by the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. And this year, I'm happy to announce that we actually managed to clinch a partnership with the Packet Foundation in the US as well. So these are our two supporting partners. We're made up of a group of volunteers as well as a paid management team that manage all programs, as well as our volunteers and advocates located in Singapore. So my presentation will be structured according to three main themes: the causes of haze, the effects and solutions. One caveat, I guess, is that we'll be looking mainly at part of Southeast Asia. Comes over from mainly from Indonesia to both Singapore as well as Malaysia. So perhaps I'll talk a little bit about excuse me, about what happened in 2019. So we looked at data that was put out by the WRI on their the World Resources Institute on their Global Forest Watch website, and looking primarily at the dry season between June and October of 2019. And we find that if you can see here, I won't go into too much details. We can talk more in the question and answer session. But you can see here a very stark figure of 77% of hotspots were actually found on land outside of concession areas, or outside or basically our unclassified or forest areas. Again, this is definitely a call for concern, as a lot of these fires actually happen on a large area that quite possibly we do not have any kind of organized efforts to manage these areas. So I think that this is something that I wanted to point out. If we look further into the data, we see that oil palm companies account for about close to 10% of the hotspots. The pulpwood concessions account for about 12%. And then your logging concessions account for about 2% of the fires. So I think the effects have been partially iterated by Helena early on in the session, but I think that there are social and economic effects of haze. In Singapore, we see businesses that are being affected, eateries especially, that see up to a drop of up to 90% in their patronage during the haze period. Hospital admissions for people with pre-existing conditions also increase when PSI is elevated in Singapore. And a key thing to note is that in Singapore, actually, we have one of the highest rates of asthma in the world. So 1 in 5 children in Singapore actually suffer from asthma. So haze becomes then a very detrimental problem for people who have existing respiratory conditions. Of course, not to forget our migrant worker population, which recently came into a spotlight during the COVID, during this pandemic. But we have about close to 300,000 migrant workers that are employed in construction, and this is mainly outdoor work. So they are one of the more vulnerable communities in Singapore that actually suffer from the haze. But of course, haze comes from Indonesia, and we must not forget that Indonesia suffers from a much larger extent of the haze as compared to Singapore. So in 2019, it's estimated that about 900,000 people in just 6 Indonesian provinces actually suffer from some kind of serious respiratory conditions. So that is quite a serious condition, a serious problem that results from haze. So one of the causes of haze that we look into is of course degraded peatlands, right? And degraded peatlands are a problem because there are increased fire risks on degraded peatlands, and these fire risks of course correspond to an increase in chance of haze. And just to put that number into perspective, just to put the problem into perspective, is that every hectare of degraded peatland is actually equivalent to the emissions of 3 cars, or the annual emissions of 3 cars, right? And we have an estimated number of 2 million hectares of degraded peatlands in Indonesia itself. So it is something that we definitely need to look into, especially in relation to climate change. So what are peatlands? Peatlands are waterlogged rainforests, basically, right? And these peatlands around the world actually cover about 3% of the Earth's surface, but they store more carbon than all the plants and trees in the world. So it is a good case for protecting protecting further carbon emissions. 70% of peatlands in Southeast Asia are actually found in Indonesia, and these are concentrated on 3 main areas: Sumatra, Kalimantan, as well as Papua. So it accounts for about roughly about 10% of the land area in Indonesia. So the other cause is perhaps the demand and related in somewhat related to the degradation of peatlands, is the demand for agricultural products. And one such product that comes to mind, of course, is palm oil, right? However, contrary to many misconceptions, palm oil is actually up to 10 times more efficient than other oil crops. So switching out of it is not necessarily the best solution. It is also a significant source of livelihood for communities in our region. Malaysia and Indonesia produces up to 85% of the global supply of palm oil. So that is quite a lot of people that, if you can imagine, that are employed in this industry. Apart from that, palm oil is also a very versatile product. 50% of products in supermarkets actually contain palm oil. And in the Singapore case, about 90% of eateries in Singapore use palm oil in their cooking. So there is a difference. I mean, there is, I guess, if you put it simply, there is good palm oil and there is bad palm oil, right? There are a number of certification systems that are out there that cover, that generally cover the NDP standards, as well as no burning policies. So the MSPO is a Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Policy, Association. The ISPO is the Indonesian equivalent. And the RSPO is it's an independent, internationally recognized certification association that certifies palm oil in a more holistic fashion, right? So they cover producers upstream all the way down to manufacturers downstream. So the RSPO has also one of the more robust principles and criteria that offer protection for biodiversity. And the RSPO also has a trademark that is recognizable by the consumer. So coming to the solutions, I'll start with, I guess, a broad macro view of what are some of the things that the Indonesian government and the Singapore government have done, and then drill into some of the things that PM Haze is working on in Singapore. So the Indonesian government actually has since, I guess, at least since 2015, right, put in policies that aim to protect the environment. So no fires is one. They also have a permanent moratorium on new forest clearance since 2019, and the protection of peatland areas is covered by the setting up of the Peatland Restoration Agency, which basically aims to restore 2 million hectares of degraded peatlands in Indonesia. And they've also come up with what they call a peat hydrological unit map, which basically outlines the location of all the peatlands in Indonesia and basically divides them into areas of cultivation and areas for protection. The Singapore government has also responded to haze with the Transboundary Haze Pollution Act that was enacted back in 2014. I won't go into too much detail on how the act has been working out and what are some of the problems that it surfaces, but I will say that it is largely symbolic. It's a symbolic deterrent. It is important to note that there has been no successful prosecutions to date as well. And it's probably partly due to the lack of cooperation or the lack of collaboration, the lack of that intention to collaborate with the Indonesian government when this act was first enacted. And I think the next thing is that an act like that potentially infringes upon the sovereignty of another nation. So I think there are a lot of challenges to both governments actually working together on this. The Singapore government, or rather the National Supermarket in Singapore, has also responded to haze in 2015 by withdrawing products that are sourced from a particular firm that was suspected of contributing to haze. And this was essentially a boycott, right? So boycotts are not necessarily the best way to go about things, in our opinion, and I think that this is something that has that it doesn't solve the problem, right? Because these are products that are in the daily lives of people, and people need to use them. So rather than targeting the products themselves, we probably need to look at the practices and to improve the practices of these firms rather than penalizing them at the market level. So our program, we don't say that we can solve all the problems, but what I can say is that we try to bring this agency back to the people so that people can get involved in transboundary haze prevention. And we do it by three main ways: building knowledge, community participation, and allowing people to take action. So we are part of a few alliances and we are members of a few organizations, the FFA, the RSPO, and SASPO that was set up by WWF and a number of private sector organizations in Singapore. And this enables us to share knowledge and enables us to understand better about industry norms, as well as understand better on how to collaborate with the industry on potential solutions in the future. So we've run campaigns largely to educate the public about the root causes of haze, as well as to educate the public on what are some of the solutions that we think are viable. So our very first campaign was a collaboration with the WWF and the Singapore Institute of International Affairs back in 2015, and that was called We Breathe What We Buy. And that was perhaps one of the first campaigns, or maybe even the first campaign that focused on a consumer-based solution to transboundary haze in the region. We hold roadshows and talks, although that's not very feasible at this moment, but we've converted, we've moved on to a virtual mode. So do look out for our events. We engage the media as well. Educating the media, I think, is one very important and one very significant way of educating the public. So next, community participation. We do it via community events that we organize for people in Singapore to better understand about the issue and to bring various stakeholders together to talk about and to co-create solutions for transboundary haze. We work with youth across academic institutions in Singapore, as well as pre-tertiary institutions. And these are just some of the groups that we've worked with in the past and currently as well. This is a collaboration with the two largest universities in Singapore, the National University of Singapore, as well as the Nanyang Technological University. So we're working with the students to actually create a haze-free campus where basically eateries on campus use sustainable palm oil as a way to prevent haze. So finally, taking action. So we do organize trips up to Malaysia, which is convenient for us because it's just across the causeway, to better understand the landscape of sustainable peatland management and conservation, as well as to get involved in the conservation of these peatlands itself. And we worked with various government and public organizations to run this program. We also run a program called Go Haze Free in Singapore, where we bring together members of the community to go out to their favorite restaurants, to learn more about the issue, to ask them to switch to sustainable palm oil, and to advocate for the issue in the future. We've also, since 2019, developed a peatland tree adoption program, whereby we're actually working with the Indonesian organization, Indonesian NGO in the village, that's village-based. It's basically a tree adoption program where people adopt trees in our nursery, and that contribution will go towards the ecological conservation of peatlands, as well as community development in these areas. Dining at a Haze Free Eatery, we have a number of restaurants in Singapore that actually use sustainable palm oil, so we actively promote these restaurants as part of our past campaigns and also our upcoming campaign. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about our community-managed peatland restoration, just the last couple of slides here. Our location, the location that we're at is in Sungai Tohor village in Meranti Regency in Riau province. So this is about a 3 to 4 hour journey from Singapore via boat ride. And the program aims to impact fire and haze risks through peatland restoration, enhance the community-centric peatland restoration model, as well as increase collaboration among regional stakeholders in peatland restoration. Some of the collaborations that we have currently are with the University of Newcastle, as well as Nanyang Technological University. These are just some of the people that are on the project, including myself. They are managing both the project on the ground, as well as coordinating the outcomes of the project. So our strategy mainly covers the restoration of vegetation cover, the restoration of hydrology, and finally community development. And again, I'll be happy to elaborate on some of these if any of you are interested to know more. So this is a holistic restoration program that we aim to not only ecologically restore these peatlands, but more importantly, develop the community and educate them about the value of the land and why is it important to protect these peatland areas. And finally, to develop community incentives through palodi culture. So palodi culture basically is the wet cultivation of native crops, for example, the sago palm, which then can be further processed into products that can be to edible products. So before I close, I'll just talk about what's coming soon. We're launching our supermarket guide soon, and this will be the first supermarket guide in Singapore that will list out a range of products in our supermarkets that contain sustainable palm oil. The reason why we came out with this guide is because the RSPO trademark is actually few and far between. So you won't actually find the RSPO trademark on many of these products, right? But the thing is that many of these consumer goods manufacturers have actually used sustainable palm oil in their production of these edible items. And what we do is that we try to educate consumers on what kind of products are actually available in the market that use sustainable palm oil, and therefore a way for people to personally get involved in transboundary haze prevention. The next campaign, the next thing that is upcoming is I mentioned earlier, was a collaboration with the Packet Foundation. So we are actually going to launch a campaign on haze-free palm oil in Singapore, mainly engaging food establishments in Singapore to switch to haze-free palm oil, and also assuring the public that these establishments will continue or will commit to using sustainable palm oil through an auditing system. Right. So thank you very much for listening in to my presentation. I look forward to speaking to you guys in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben. So it's reassuring to see that there are so many possible solutions, especially those that are people-led. And I think the connection between what we consume and like practices of production is really important. Your logo on "We breathe what we buy," I think is feels very direct to me. I think it's not just about food, but also the electricity that we consume and so on, relevant to Tara's presentation. So we've now had 4 presentations that have comprehensively discussed different aspects of air pollution and haze, both local and transboundary. So we have quite a few participants in the room now. So we can open up to questions or comments. Given that there's quite a few people, and probably we can talk for up to 20 minutes, I think, 25 minutes. Please, could you, if you'd like to make an intervention, please could you briefly introduce yourself and then concisely but fully say what you would like to say, either as a question or a comment. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Brad from Green News Agency. I have a question. As during the COVID-19 pandemic, but I have some news that there will be new coal-fired power plant project in Southeast Asia, especially in Laos. Do you think it will increase the problem of air pollution, transboundary haze pollution in this region? Thank you.
So I think that's quite a specific question to Tara. So let's take that one straight away.
Okay, thank you, Kun Prat. This is for the first time I heard the news. It is true that some investor actually pushing a proposed coal-fired power plant in Laos. Is that your? So I mean, the answer actually very straightforward, because of when we look at the existing coal-fired power plant in Laos PDR, which is the one that Hong Sa coal-fired power plant. We also see the emission, air pollution, air emission, including PM 2.5, actually contributing to the whole air pollution crisis in the region, especially in the greater Mekong sub-region, which is covering northern Thailand, Chan State, and northern Laos. So undoubtedly, the new one, the new coal-fired power plant in Laos will be contributing to much more severe air pollution, and then impacting not only local community but larger population in the mainland Southeast Asia, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Prat, for that question. Are there other questions? Ajahn Apichai, please could you also introduce yourself? Thank you.
You're calling me, right? Apichai, right?
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, hi. My name is Apichai, and I'm an independent development specialist. I just want to respond to the last questioner about, I know that there's a new initiative apparently from a Singaporean firm. Maybe our friend from Singapore can check it out. But I think it's already more or less in the news that a Singaporean firm is going to construct or have plans to construct a coal-fired plant in southern Laos. Okay, I believe it's in the Champasak area. But I don't have too much details about that, other than to say, well, it will certainly emit CO2 and greenhouse gases and whatever other noxious pollutants that will come out of a coal-fired plant. Okay, and so if Singapore wants to be seen as a, shall we say, standard bearer, then I have some question as to why are they exporting polluting, energy production systems in another ASEAN country, basically. But then, these things are quite common. I mean, Thailand has invested in the Hong Sa plant, and of course, Malaysia has invested, but not on on air pollution, but on water, right? In the Dong Sa Hong Dam and all that. So I mean, it's becoming an ASEAN sort of a market, whether you like it or not, one way or the other. So anyway, I just thought I will react to that because I know something is in the works. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I see Sergio has his hand up. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Please go ahead.
Yes, just very brief introduction. I was born and raised in Santiago, Chile, and now I'm living in Koh Phangan, Thailand. And since 2017, I've been trying to promote the relations between the Buddhist teachings and sustainability in Malaysia, Thailand, and also in South America. So I wanted to ask something, not only to Benjamin, but anyone who wants to contribute. Also Carl that mentioned how powerful the message of we breathe what we buy, and how we can educate consumers, especially. In my case, I've been trying to share this with people who is attracted to the teachings of the Buddha, as well as permaculture and other kinds of mindful and sustainable practices, right? In the case of Chile, for example, when Benjamin mentioned boycotting, in the case of Chile, boycotting has actually had a few positive impacts in some companies and have made them change their practices because of this consumer boycotting. So I was wondering if anyone could give me more ideas on how to educate consumers from a very neutral kind of way, not maybe proposing boycotting only, but also acknowledging the power of this social action and how they can force companies to change their practices, especially now that we see that there's a lot of research done in terms of monocultives and the impact that they have on soil degradation. I don't know how related that is to sustainable palm oil production and things like that. If it's too diverse and not very clear, just let me know. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sergio. I think, so that could be a question not just to Benjamin, but it's definitely also relevant to Daniel, given the role of large companies in northern Thailand. And perhaps also, I'd be interested for Tara's thoughts on this, not necessarily for agriculture, but for energy and transport, about what consumers could actually do. And then Helena, because you were also talking about broad solutions. So I think it's a good question for the panel. Thank you. Who would like to address this first?
Should I go first?
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Sergio. Thanks for the question. I think, yeah, I agree with Carl. It's a very good question. I think relating to consumers is something that that we've been trying to do since 2015, right? And it's not easy, because since, I mean, in Singapore, at least from our experience, haze plays a very big part on whether people care about these issues or not, right? So haze pollution or air pollution comes in, and people get reminded of, you know, why or gets people start asking questions about, you know, why do we experience this on a yearly basis? Why doesn't it go away? So we then try to bring some of this messaging to people. But in between the haze episodes, right, interest basically tapers away. So what are some of the ways that we can actually find a better way to relate to people? So I think the two ways. One is we felt that through the whole this whole trend of talking about climate change, climate issues, I think it's something that we feel has been becoming a bit more relevant. And so that's how we've been trying to relate the support for sustainable palm oil, for example, and the protection of peatlands, and how that actually relates to climate change in terms of saving carbon emissions, saving CO2 emissions, and things like that, right? And the other thing I think is I think in this region, not only in Singapore but many of our neighboring countries, we all enjoy food, right? So I think food is another way into the hearts of the people, and And one thing that we've noticed that, you know, there is I mean, there are a lot of efforts out there, for example, on various other commodities like coffee, you know, things like that, where people are a little bit more interested in understanding the ethical and I guess maybe eco-friendly practices of the production of these commodities. So I think that's something that we've been trying, or we will be doing as part of our upcoming campaign as well, is to introduce people into firstly the environmentally friendly nature of sustainable palm oil, and then secondly, what we can who are the people behind sustainable palm oil, you know, who are the people actually producing this stuff, for example, independent smallholders. How do we showcase their stories, things like that? Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Do any of the other panel want to respond to this question?
I think, if I have an answer, it is a very important question, and I don't have a direct answer to that. In a way, it would be nice if Ajahn Chayan was here, because he has been kind of connecting in interesting ways with some of the civil society response in Chiang Mai towards haze issues, such as the Chiang Mai Breathe Council. What I would, perhaps I could do is maybe give a couple of comments in just to maybe emphasize the point how difficult it is to try to find some sort of uniform response which can kind of bring together a consumer response or a public will to address haze issues. And it kind of highlights the fact that consumers are not just one group. And the thing I'd like to say is that when we suddenly, if I go back to the sort of maize and haze issues in Thailand, what you've seen is that it's really highlighted many other types of schisms within society. So it can kind of show, say, sometimes we say within an urban middle class response, you're kind of looking at a sort of perhaps an urban-rural divide, or a kind of maybe it's highlighting class conflicts within Thailand. You're also religious involvement, the way that it becomes very politicized, and it's also tied into ongoing political conflicts in Thailand, and also military power, means that this altogether means that it's very hard to kind of visualize one singular response in that, and so you are having to deal with a whole different collection of stakeholder groups to try and bring to the table and can kind of gain a productive discussion on haze. And maybe the example I used at the end of my presentation does show that this kind of multi-stakeholder work is possible, and this was the case of Mayor Jem. But these kind of coalitions are very fragile, and it is a big question: how do you keep them going if you get something started up? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Daniel. Do Tara or Helena want to respond? If not, I have a question as well that might be also relevant to Helena and Tara. Okay, as the chair, I'll just throw in one question. So I think that the current pandemic has made us pay more attention to health and health services and the capacity of health services to deal with the pandemic. But I think that the issue of air pollution, whether we're talking about from coal-fired power stations or from the burning of different agricultural crops, it has long-term consequences. But often my impression, I think actually Benjamin even said this, that a lot of the media reporting and even probably the policy responses are quite short-term, like reactive to the haze this year right now. So I'm wondering whether, what types of long-term solutions do you see us emerging that might relate either to a recognition of the importance of health, or the possibilities of economic restructuring, as Tara was suggesting towards the end. So do you see any evidence or any reason to be optimistic that there might be some new long-term policies that deal with these different types of air pollution that we're talking about? Maybe I could address this to Tara or Helena. Thank you.
Maybe I can actually go first, be very short. To respond to your question, Carl, I think it really depending on a political dynamic that we have in each country. I think for Thailand, I have to be very pessimistic about it because of we can see a political debate and dynamic here is very volatile and moving to nowhere if we don't speak out and stand up. But I think this it is the larger discussion on how we move forward. I think the role of political parties and political institutions in the country play significant role in terms of moving toward a green and just recovery. But I don't see it in Thailand at the moment. The news coming from Kun Prat about the proposed coal-fired power plant in Laos shocking me a little bit because of we hope that we learn from the pandemic. We learn a lot from the pandemic, but I don't think we learned. So, but there should be a light at the end of the tunnel, especially for Thailand. So we need to work broadly with different sector into societies and keep moving on maybe building up something that we think this is the belief we will have someday cleaner air and a better political system, and also other aspects when it comes political system. Last but not least, I think with the new generation standing up, right, broadly Generation C in Thailand speak out, I think there's a hope that we can move forward. But to bring in the new direction or the new version of green and just recovery in the country, I think it needs everyone. It needs everyone, especially those who have I think the most impacted communities and stakeholders and all walk of life of the citizen in the country. But yeah, so hope I answer your question.
You did, thank you. Helena, do you also want to address this? I'm also thinking in terms, several of the presentations have highlighted the transboundary dimension, and Tara's drawn attention especially to the domestic political context of Thailand. I'm not sure if you want to comment also on the transboundary dimension as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I would have to answer along the lines of Tara as well, a bit more pessimistic. I think a lot of how the policy responses around Haze has built up over the years is very much because of its seasonality. So the fact that the Haze, there is almost a Haze season. I mean, we talk about Haze seasons as if it's a well-defined season where you will always have the situation. And because it is not constant throughout the year, the responses, the policy responses has been very much only how to say, confined to this period. And when there is Haze, there's going to be a lot of talk, not only within the country, but also from diplomatically between countries. What should countries do about it? How should countries respond? How should our neighbors respond to us about Haze? But as soon as it dissipates, the political conversation dissipates as well. One good analogy that I quite like is the difference between how we talk about Haze and how we talk about dengue in the region. So dengue is also a seasonal thing, but there is a difference there is no taboo about talking about dengue beyond the dengue season. People are able to discuss and people are able to think about how we should respond to dengue and control dengue, even outside the dengue season. And I think this has very much to do with how closely linked Haze is to the economy. not only the national economy, but the regional economy as well. So this is something that I think we must work hard to not necessarily disconnect, but to see in ways where they both can exist, coexist. Economic development and also environmental preservation and environmental conservation, which I think there's still a lot of stresses and a lot of contrasts in the region. Last year was actually quite interesting because we had the climate strikes in Malaysia, and I think most of the world as well, during the haze season. So these kind of opportunities were very important to show the link that haze should be thought about, and haze has broader impacts beyond just our immediate breathing space. It has impacts on climate and all that. But just to end off on my comment there, I think consumerism is very important, and I think what PM Haze is doing is really fantastic. And just latching on to the final few slides that Benjamin spoke to us about, is kind of also a question posed to Benjamin, if you don't mind. Your new project, which is sort of highlighting products that not necessarily does not have RSPO labels, but still do incorporate certified palm oil in some way. I think this goes back to the problem of the Western and the Eastern sort of market. I believe that some of these products in the West, they may have the RSPO labeling, but when it comes to our markets, they don't bother putting it on the products. You may want to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the problem, because there is no, there's not enough acknowledgement that there is enough power of the consumer in Asia, that, you know, it's sort of like a respect to us. Put it on your products just the same way you put it on the Western products, and then that will also give an initiative for us to learn more about consumerism and to make the right choices. Because I recently did a survey as part of a group, and there was very low knowledge both in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia about labeling and about the power of consumer in choosing brands that could put your dollar where your mouth is. So I think that is something that we have to look into importantly in this region as well.
Thank you very much. We'll have to wrap up fairly soon, I think. I think there's, if Benjamin, do you want to respond to this comment?
Yes, if you don't mind. Is that okay with
it's
everyone?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, Helena, I completely agree with you. In the sense that there is very little awareness in this region, and especially in Malaysia and Indonesia, right? I mean, I've been to many supermarkets in KL and Johor, and you know, and you virtually cannot find the RSPO trademark on any product, right? Even though they are, a lot of these products are actually exported as sustainable palm oil. In Singapore, I think we are slightly luckier in the sense that we do not have that baggage of being a producer country, right? So I think that enables us to be able to talk about certification a lot more openly, I guess, in that sense, right? And coming back to what actually Sergio mentioned about the effectiveness of boycotts, right? I think one positive thing that came out of the boycott of those pulp and paper products is that people felt that, you know, the next haze season comes, then palm oil is going to be targeted, right? Is you know, they targeted pulp and paper back in 2015, and perhaps palm oil is going to be next. So you can actually find in Singapore that a range of cooking oil products in Singapore, and almost all of them, I would say, actually have the trademark on them, actually have the RSPO trademark. And of course, these are all oils that are imported from Malaysia and Indonesia, right? So there is that growing awareness, that I guess that growing motivation for companies to put on the trademark to communicate that they are sustainable. But you're right in the sense that whether or not the consumer understands it is another matter, because decision makers in the household that buy cooking oil may or may not be interested in the and I would like to think that most likely they are not interested with the RSPO trademark. I mean, if I take a more pessimistic view. Could I just comment a little bit on what Carl mentioned about the long-term solutions? I'll just do this very quickly. I would like to take a little bit more of an aspirational approach after Tara and Helena's more realistic responses to a long-term solution to this transboundary problem. And I think that one of the areas and one of the strengths of Singapore is economic diplomacy, right? And our financial institutions, I believe, play a very big part in this region, right? Whether it's in terms of financing various industries, or whether it is in terms of investing in various industries. But when if we then focus onto palm oil, right, then we are looking at investments in financing or I guess loans, right? So banks in Singapore actually loan money out to agricultural companies to go about their production activities. So we actually just released a report. I'll drop it in the chat later, the link to the report. But I think some of our recommendations are that we could actually follow I mean, the Association of Banks in Singapore have actually come out with a list of guidelines for financial institutions to take up, and the DBS Bank in Singapore has actually taken on some of these guidelines. They're not 100% ideal at this stage, but I think it is a step forward. And I think that there are two things that we can look to financial institutions for the solution, is that they probably need to be a little bit more transparent around the process of due diligence, perhaps, or even the process of auditing, or even how do you actually onboard these clients into giving them the money, right? And then the second thing is about accountability for the action. So when you do give this money out, right, is it actually causing any positive or negative impacts?
Great, thank you very much. So we're going to have to wrap up in a minute. I'm not sure if either Daniel or Tara have a final comment they'd like to share. If no, okay, that's okay. Daniel, okay, we're all okay. Okay, so this is a slightly shorter session than we'd normally have because we're fitting in with the international conference as well. I'd like to thank the four speakers, Tara, Daniel, Helena, and Ben, for taking the time to join this discussion today on what is a really important topic, at least for some of us outside of the haze season at the moment. I know that it's coming for some, but I think that it's important to keep on discussing these topics if we want to see positive policy change, and also to understand better the changes that are happening in the region. So thank you so much to the four presenters, and also to those that joined to listen or contributed to the discussion today. And I hope that we can have a similar event in the near future to keep the discussion going. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.